Hello, everyone. I'm Omkar. I'm the founder CEO of Miracle.io Germany. Today on our podcast, we have Miss Urmila Samson. Miss Urmila describes herself as a mother of three children who have been unschooled. Now, unschooling is a topic that many of you may not be familiar with. Homeschooling is probably something that you've heard of, but unschooling is something that was new to me as well. As the parent of three unschooled children who have gone on to lead very successful lives, Ms. Urmila has been a part of several workshops and sessions on the topic, including a TEDx session. She's also been a part of several organizations and foundations, including Swashikshan, Enterprise India Fellowship, and Youth Collaborating for Compassion that support youth, parents, as well as schools in their holistic development of their children. Miss Urmila, thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us on the Miracle.io podcast. And right off the bat, as many of our listeners are also curious, as am I, what made you choose the unschooling path for your three children?
Thank you very much, Omkar. It's really exciting for me, and it's quite special to be asked to speak about this because I always think of myself as someone who is a mother and a homemaker and just living as natural as possible a life in an urban setting as one can. And then when it's kind of brought to the world as something really special, I feel very special about that. So I didn't think of unschooling as such. As you said in the introduction, I felt that a school is really the worst place for children to spend their childhood. Childhood is such a beautiful, magical time, and there's just so much potential in a human child. And schooling has a certain kind of structure and systems which systematically kind of beat that down and create a human who's not really anywhere close to their full potential. Um, so I didn't send my children to school. This was back in 1992 when my first of three children was born, pre-internet, and so I had no idea that there were other families who were consciously not sending their children to school. Once the internet came several years later, I was excited to find that, hey, not only are there other families like us, but there's a name for it, and it's called homeschooling. So around 2008, 2009, I started coming across families in India who heard that I hadn't sent my children to school, and I thought, wow, I found my tribe. And a little later, I found that no, 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 we are not really a tribe because these are homeschoolers. And over the internet, I learned that there are other families who are growing just freely and naturally the way we are, and that is called unschooling, where with the parents are not teachers, they're not sending their children for classes, they're not preparing them for with curriculum and for board exams and necessarily for college. And this was an absolutely completely different from homeschooling. And in fact, homeschooling, you could say, is close to alternative schooling, since you wanted to understand the difference. Alternative schooling, the child is kind of it's child led, but the I mean, they take into consideration children's interests and making things interesting for the child. But the aim is to educate the child with the current syllabus curriculum. It's just that it's made more interesting, and you go at the child's pace, whether it's alternative schools or whether it's homeschooling. And whereas in unschooling, the parent says, I don't know anyone else better than they know themselves. It's more about not interfering in the natural growing and learning process of the child. So they live and learn and grow, and all the learning is equivalent, whether they want to learn math or whether they want to climb a tree. uh, for us it's equally important, and it's given equal weight. And if they for instance, one of my children learned how to write pretty young at the age of 5 or 6. Another one learned to write around 11, 12, and it wasn't Roman script. It was a bit of Japanese, a bit of Bengali, a lot of Devanagari script. And at the age of 18, the same child learned the whole Telugu script. So we just have a completely open, and another child learned how to write at the age of 18. So it's really, that's the level of freedom of unschooling.
It's very, very interesting, Miss Urmila. I think this is something that is a new concept for so many people. As you know, I'm sure it was the case also in the pre-internet era, but still today in the internet era as well. This is a completely system-breaking concept, if you think about it. That's not something how we've been conditioned to think and conditioned to live our lives. So one question that pops up in my mind over here is, school is often traditional schools, classical schools, or even alternative schools often have some sort of a curriculum that these are a few milestones, let's say, that you're supposed to achieve in order to achieve supposedly success in your life. When you give that sort of freedom to, let's say, a child, is the child also uh, given the resources, let's say, to learn what they want to learn or choose to pursue what they want to pursue? So how does that work? So maybe if you can help us understand that a bit more.
Yes, so resources, I've in the beginning, I was quite excited about providing resources all the time from my conditioning. So I would think of what I feel that the child should learn, or what I had learned the children should learn, my conditioning basically, and I would provide resources. And when the children were small, they all always ready to listen to the parent or an adult, or excited about something new, and so it was fairly easy to provide exciting resources and have them used at in some way or the other. However, as each of them grew, I noticed that they had different interests, and that these interests lay outside of the scope of school curriculum, of resources available, and it wasn't so easy to bring. For instance, when I just mentioned that one of my children wanted to learn Japanese. He didn't like Roman script, he didn't like the English spellings, and so he wanted to learn Japanese first. That's the first thing, language he wanted to learn, and the first script he wanted to learn. It wasn't so easy to find a Japanese teacher. So now we have the internet, and that's just amazing. But at the time, it took me 2 years to find, and he wanted a native Japanese male teacher. So he was very specific. I remember my daughter also was very specific. If she wanted me to teach her something, she would teach me how to teach her. So my style of teaching, and then we always had a challenge finding her teachers who taught in the way which she wanted to be taught, and it's almost impossible. So in the case of resources as well as resource people, it's as natural as life. Sometimes you may get it, sometimes you may not. Whereas a limited curriculum has limited resources, and you can get them from somewhere.
Right.
But unlimited learning kind of children, there are times when you don't get the right resources and resource persons at the right time, though much easier now through internet.
I see. I see. So it has its benefits, like freedom. That sort of freedom has its benefits, and and the challenges and the doors that it opens up are also there. Like,
Yes.
finding the right thing at the right time for the child who wants to learn is something that I guess, especially in the pre-internet era, it must have been a very difficult task, I'm sure. Now, of course, a lot of things have become easier, but I'm sure even in the vast, ocean of information in the
Yes.
internet, I'm sure it's still hard to find the exact thing that we're looking for.
Sometimes,
Uh,
yes.
exactly, exactly. What you mentioned about that, your daughter, she asked, or she sort of taught you how to teach her. That
Mhm.
was something that really caught my attention. So maybe if you can elaborate a bit on that, like how did she teach you how to teach her?
It wasn't so much as teaching, it was more of an attitude. So I would have a certain way of talking, or a way of approaching something that she wanted to learn. And then she would keep, we went through various iterations on what was wrong with the way I was approaching it. So I find that teachers and parents today are not open to feedback. So I guess what she was doing is giving me feedback about what I was doing wrong and that it really isn't helping her. And then I had to keep changing my attitude or my words or my way of speaking or even my tone, or I mean, we all know that teachers have have a certain kind of style where some are brilliant, some aren't, some might suit a certain student or a certain subject, some might not. So I find it a useful thing for adult or a parent or a teacher to keep in mind that taking feedback from a student would be very helpful in helping the student learn. It was more like that.
Absolutely. Like treating the student or the child as not a child necessarily, as someone who is less intelligent or less somehow a smaller being, but rather more as an equal.
Yes.
There might still be, certain roles that you play in that equation, but in the end, the child also has a say in how they are going through their journey as well.
Yes.
And I think that's the crucial part over here, especially in traditional schooling. I don't think this is it's a culture of sort of getting that student feedback as a part of the process as well. I'm sure there are schools that probably take parent feedback and so on, especially now, but I don't think a student ever feels heard in the
Yes.
traditional system. And I think that's such an important aspect of any human, for that matter, the feeling of
And
being heard.
yes, 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 very important. Yes,
Indeed, indeed. And I think that's a very, very, very crucial bit of information. And I think it's a philosophy as well, if you
yes,
think about it. It's
yes.
about how we treat our students and children.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
if I may add, sorry to
Please.
interrupt you, is that recently there was we had this Pune Urban Village gathering, and there was a young college student who held a workshop. Like we keep hearing of books and workshops on parenting, he how to handle your children. So he had offered a workshop on childrening, how to handle your parents. And it was interesting. I had to keep being called away because I was an organizer, but the part which caught my attention was, which I completely agree with, is that children don't have a choice. Children don't have a voice in anything. What time they wake up, whether they can go to the toilet or not during class, what they want to eat, where they want to go, how they want to spend their time. No voice, no choice about which subject to learn, which part of the subject, to what depth they may like to go to in the subject. And children really want to. We think children don't want to learn. Children, now that internet is out, we know children love to learn, and they can go to depths of subjects that we don't even know. The subjects are infinite, the parts of the subjects are infinite, and children are so excited about going into all that. And yeah, so I think children having a voice is just so crucial right now. Always,
Indeed.
but now it can be
Indeed.
also.
Indeed. I think it's an important evolution that we need to make as a society, for sure. Maybe one question I had on this topic is, when your I believe it was your boy who learned or wanted to learn Japanese as his first one of his first languages, if I'm not wrong. Um, how did that turn out? Like, how long did he pursue Japanese? It was a choice that he made, and you
Yes,
also made sure that he was given the support system to
right.
exercise his choice and pursue it.
Yes.
So how did that turn out in the end? Like, how did that go about?
Yes, so that's also interesting in how these things happened in his life, where he got an excellent Japanese teacher, and he was otherwise a wild and playful and active boy. And there he would be, sitting and doing worksheets. I couldn't believe a child of mine was sitting down quietly doing worksheets and homework, and that too in Japanese. But after a month, this young person had to go back to Japan, and a lady came in who was very teacherish, the normal, and he just couldn't stand her, so she lasted a few days, I think, and that was the end of his Japanese class. The same thing happened for him for squash, where he got an excellent squash teacher, and then that guy left, and then another guy who wasn't so good, and then a hopeless guy. So he did squash for maybe a year, but it was a sad situation. And the similar thing happened in football. He got a fantastic teacher who had to then start teaching the older boys, and so he got a medium grade teacher, and then who had to do something else, and so he got not a, such a great. Of course, he stuck with football somehow, and it was a very very tough time. That for years and years he did football, and the whole sports situation in the country is such that it just was downhill all the way over the years. But so these are the challenges, and you can't say that whether this is a challenge of unschool or homeschool or my son in particular, or how it is. But these are, since we were just doing it naturally, these were the natural occurrences in their learning journey and their life journey.
I see, indeed. And I think like one thing that I see in common over here and a lot of research out there as well is that the relationship of the teacher with the student is a far more important than the subject or the expertise, let's say, of the teacher in that subject. I think, like you said, like having that connection, a good connection between the teacher, the educator, and the learner, I think probably is the most important factor in determining, whether the student would be interested in the topic and would want to pursue it further, and would take it forward as well. I believe.
I think it's both. I
Mhm.
because I noticed in all three children is that they appreciated quality more than the nature of the teacher. So, for instance, when my daughter was about between 9 and 12, she used to go regularly to a children's computer class, which combined. They taught them, for instance, they used actual craft because people didn't want children to be only at the screen, so they did actual craft, they did an actual architecture piece, a birdhouse or something, or actual beadwork, and taught them the software. And over there, she had teachers sometimes who didn't have a very good nature and no relationship with the children. But she was so intent on learning the content and making those things. And in fact, for a young girl, they were praising how well she could use a saw and carpentry tools and things like that. So she was so absorbed with and excited by the content and intent on learning what she wanted to learn, that though she would come home really upset with the teacher and their style of teacher teaching and the way they treated her and the way they spoke to her, she could override that and overcome that because she was so wanting to learn what she wanted to learn.
Mhm. Yeah, indeed. I think probably both of these factors play a major part over here for sure. And I think, especially the what you mentioned about getting feedback from their educators and from their support system for the student is also an important factor. Like whether it's, of course, supportive feedback, positive feedback, or critical feedback about things that perhaps they can do better at. So I think this feedback exchange is a two-way street. The student giving feedback to the teacher is something that is almost unheard of,
Mhm.
but the way teachers and educators and parents, for example, give feedback to their children and students is an important factor as well, I think. And the manner in which that feedback is given is uh, I would say, is a crucial factor here as well. Very interesting. One thing that often comes up about, in this unschooling, homeschooling sort of the critique about these kind of styles of education is often about uh, the social aspect for students and like groups of students, especially like many people who think about homeschooling think, oh, but then this if this school is not this student is not going to school, how are they learning how to behave in a group, for example, in a peer group? So how does the unschooling methodology sort of approach this social aspect of a
Right.
child's development?
Yes. So, yes, this is a question we get all the time. And I actually believe that children who are homeschooled and unschooled develop socially much more balanced, because they meet people. In a school, you're stuck with the same, age, same socioeconomic group, the same, sometimes gender. And you're stuck with that group for the rest of, for years and years, unless you're traveling or whatever. By and large, you're stuck. Whereas in homeschooling and unschooling, they go for classes, they have neighbors. In India, you have large families, you have joint families, you have festivals, you have all kinds of things, games, you have building societies and playing downstairs. Now, of course, not so much, because school children are, in fact, stuck to their tuitions and other kinds of routine. Then we have homeschooling parents who themselves call everyone out to play, and organize workshops and organize trips. And now there are when we my children were small, this wasn't there, but now homeschooling families, they meet, they go out on trips together, they travel. Or they go and meet other homeschoolers in other cities. And it's not my children, for instance, they had friends of all ages, from all socioeconomic backgrounds. They spent time with our staff. In fact, we had a little community where in our home of hired help, young girls and boys from the Marathi school opposite. And yeah, they were, it was really good. They would one favorite pastime for almost a year was hopping on the bus, and with these uh, uh, with these little older children, and riding to the end of Vimannagar, getting off at the Tapri, having chai or something, and coming back, or not having chai and coming back. So that's it's just a very natural life, and in a natural life you naturally mix with all kinds of people. You go to the shop. They were so friendly with the shop wallas, and because they weren't going to school, so they were just hanging out there with them, chatting. And it's much more natural and wholesome, the socializing. And when one more important point is about peer pressure, I noticed with all three of them that peers were, because they were so self-aware and not used to being uh, what shall I say, shut down or whatever, which happens in school. Peers tended to, not always but quite often, look up to them for direction. And for sure, they were never ever pressurized by peer. Absolutely unfazed by peer pressure.
Indeed, and I think one thing that I've noticed as well with a few students that we work with as ambassadors. So we have a few students who are homeschooled from Sandbox, and what you mentioned is exactly, I could see exactly the same with these students, these kids as well. They're 12, 13 right now, but they have the capacity of thinking, of articulating, of leading, even of people of 10 years older, maybe even 15 years older than they are. And
Yes,
that's just incredible to see, like all questions that people raise about the social aspect of homeschooling, unschooling, and all of these questions that come up about these, I think are, they don't have any ground, because you see the outcomes of the development of the students who go through these methods of education, or and it's just incredible to me how far ahead the students are, and they're so balanced in that sense as well. That, and self-awareness is something that many adults don't have until the end of their lives, very often. But these kids are so self-aware. They know what they're good at, or what they want to be good at, but they also know what they're not so good at, and they are not afraid to admit that and sort of be vulnerable about it as well. And I think that creates a lot of trust, I'm sure, among their peer group as well. That this person has their things together is the
yes,
is probably the aura that they give out to their peer group.
yes. So I also
And
don't want to criticize the school-going children, because I've noticed that some in the beginning we would be saying all these kinds of things what you were saying, and it's very true. But I've also noticed that the human spirit and evolution is so miraculous, or it's so magical, and it that even something like school doesn't necessarily hold children back. I've noticed that there are school going children who are equally self-aware, or vulnerable, or willing to make mistakes, and follow up on their curiosity and their questions. So I don't want to demonize schools and glorify homeschooling or unschooling. It's just that homeschooling and unschooling definitely has more of it, whereas it's school children develop sometimes in spite of it.
absolutely, I think that speaks a lot for the human spirit, as you said, right? I mean, this, like, some people, individuals, as personalities, might be so strong that they develop these things despite perhaps some of the constraints that maybe traditional schooling may have. And yeah, the intention, of course, is not to criticize or demonize traditional schools. I'm sure there are so many traditional schools that have the resources and have the mindset also to have this sort of flexibility in, like, sort of kind of try to blend the best of all worlds. And But I think, I can probably say fairly certainly that most schools are not able to do that or don't want to do that even. So the reality for a majority of the young generation remains that they are sort of constrained by the shackles of the system very often.
Absolutely. Very constraining. In fact, now earlier I was more upset about the fact that they were closed up, into a certain kind of structure. But now more and more, I'm so upset that they can't even, learn the things they want to learn, or go deeper into the things that they want to go deeper into. That's really upsetting for me. Yeah.
It is, and I think as someone who has been through a fairly traditional education system myself, I mean, I wish I was unschooled, perhaps, or homeschooled at the very least. I mean, to be fair, my mother, Smita, she also did sort of, even as a working mother, she still made sure that she taught me my science. And today, like, we're doing miracle and science and technology and all of these things, despite, again, the traditional schooling system. So I guess in the end, a lot of things in the system are not there or not perfect, or or missing. But in the end, I think ideas like these need to come out and need to sort of be shared
Yeah.
also among, make it more widely accessible and available, these thoughts, these thought processes, and these sort of philosophies. Speaking of technology, one question that I had for you is, what does the modern unschooling family or parent, let's say, um, what should they keep in mind when it comes to technology? Because technology is a topic, again, that is a hot potato in in the education space.
Yes.
What do you think about it?
So I wouldn't say what anyone should keep in mind, but I can tell you my experience. So technology, as I said, even internet just started after our unschooling journey was well underway, and I was quite excited at that when our first what is that PC came into the house, and then second one and third. By the end, all three children had PC in different rooms. So by the time Skype came, they were chatting with each other in different rooms. Now it's nothing new because we are WhatsApping. But at the time, it was so exciting that they could be in the same house and talking over their computers while they were doing other things. And then the edutainment CD-ROMs came. And that was exciting because I said, hey, the whole illiteracy problem is going to, vanish, because John Holt had said within 30 hours, actually someone can learn how to read. You don't have to have that whole painful process that they put children through years and years. That so I could see that these edutainment CD-ROMs were really all that were required, and you didn't have a teacher shouting at you. You didn't have to practice and practice. It was just you playing, and one funny noise will come if you get it wrong, and big celebration if you get something right. And it was such a lovely way to learn. And so I was very for technology from the beginning. We had no idea at that time the concerns which would come later. So when video games started coming in, the PS, just the PS, I think was the first one. My husband just bought one. We there was no bad press about it yet, and one of our children did get addicted, and he was addicted for 7 years. So it wasn't a small thing, and I was really scared through that time. And I know, since neither my husband or I know how to be strict, that's one of the reasons why we are unschoolers, because we don't know how to shout at people and force people. And we are not quite sure whether, and is this good or bad, and if it's bad, how bad is it, and what do I have better to offer. Often I used to think, like, how can I compete with these video games? And so over the duration of that 7 years, I started looking at video games more carefully, and I noticed the kind of challenges they gave, which weren't available in real life. And that particular son of mine really required challenges all the time. And it was his nature that to overcome this and win that. And the games were actually, the content of the games, even though some were violent and all that kind. He played all the worst of the whatever was considered the worst of that day. I've forgotten the names of those. He played, and people said, "Oh, that'll make them violent." Well, people noticed that we had three children in the house, 24 hours, 365 days of the year, and nobody was violent. So no one was getting overweight, no one was getting lazy, no one, all the things, no one's eyes were getting spoiled. So all the sometimes we get such a lot of media about things, but you have to really, I keep saying that I developed new eyes. I started seeing things differently. I started seeing my children differently. I started seeing deeper into the situation, what's actually happening, what's the reality of this, what's going on. And it was a real deepening experience for me. That whole 7 years of video game addiction taught me a lot, and I discovered myself. I my self-awareness grew. Like, what are my emotions, what are my responses, how can I improve on my responses?
Indeed, I think that's such a powerful account of what you just mentioned about, right? Like, yes, the there is so much being talked about video games and technology for when it comes to children, and students, and learners. But I think the perspective that you took was more inwards as well, which I think is as a parent yourself is probably the most important thing that you could do as well for for the benefit, the long term benefit of the relationship and your child as well.
Absolutely. And in fact, sorry to interrupt, but I feel now that any challenge that comes our way, anyone's way, my way, your way, anyone's way, the challenge is coming to push you inwards. This is what my takeaway from that whole experience was.
Indeed, I think the challenge is always within somehow.
Yes, yes.
Indeed. Okay, wow. And one follow up question on this that came to my mind was, um, if you had to if you were to unschool a child today, what would be different than how you did it for your three children, in the in 20-25 years ago?
Yeah, 30. My eldest is 30
30.
now.
Okay, yeah.
um so I think now I would be much less stressed, much less fearful, much more relaxed, and open minded. And I know that in comparison to other parents, I was unbelievably open minded, and but I would be even more. So knowing that what I know and having gone through what I have gone through, If I were to unschool, I would be even more accepting, because I would be less fearful, and understanding that each human being comes on this planet with an inner curriculum which is so unique. No one else knows about it. And the more freedom you give that human being to allow that to blossom and grow, the better the whole planet is going to be, is my belief. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe there are people who are going to, in their natural, if they're brought up naturally, are going to do bad things. I don't know. Life is a mystery. But if I were to do it again, I would give even more freedom and be more relaxed.
Okay, I think that's a wonderful way to, close our conversation on this note. Like, I think it's a very powerful message for everyone, every person out there who's listening to this podcast, about how the human spirit should be allowed to blossom, should be allowed to make their mistakes, learn from them, and become stronger, emerge from it essentially. And I think on that note, it's been a very very big and pleasure and honor on our side to have you on this podcast, Ms. Urmila. And thank you so much for sharing your journey and your stories, and so many of your accounts and so many ideas that are completely new for me as well, and so many others out there who are listening to this podcast. Thank you once again for your time and for your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and share these ideas with the world. I also like to share them. Thank you so much.